October news on housing couldn't be worse. The amount of active homes sitting around not selling, growing at a record pace. Jerome Powell came out last Wednesday. The Fed unanimously voted to increase interest rates again. And their announcement has sent shockwaves, leading many businesses already this week laying off record numbers of people, which will undoubtedly hit the housing market even worse. Some of the things that I've been updating you on in the past about the fact that remote workers are being drawn away from the markets that they move to. 30 million people who supposedly moved over the past 2.5 years to go to a different city because they could work remote are losing their jobs at big numbers. And the marketplaces where those folks move to are getting crushed. Some of the data that I just came out from Realtor.com is actually showing that many of those markets across the country are in very bad shape, and this is not a clickbait message. I'm gonna show you exactly where the active inventory has gone in those marketplaces, prices crashing in those marketplaces. If you live in those areas or are around them, you are going to need to modify your position in the market and how you take your home to market if you're thinking of selling it, and probably even your time frame needs to be adjusted a little bit. As always, hit that like button, please. Took a month off and YouTube's making me pay for it. So I want to get this video back out there and subscribe to the channel if you're not already following. Let's get started. As mortgage rates recently doubled across the country over the previous 12 months, 42 out of 50 cities saw their inventory jump in October, according to Realtor.com. The top gainers were Phoenix, Arizona. We saw a rise in their listing base by 174%, followed by Raleigh, North Carolina at 167%, and Nashville, Tennessee with 145%. Nearly 36% of the homes listed in Phoenix had price reductions, followed by Austin, Texas, and then Las Vegas, Nevada, which saw 24% of all their homes see a price reduction. To recap last week, Jerome Powell came out and shocked the entire stock market when he said,
"It is very premature to be thinking about pausing." So people, when they hear lags, they think about a pause. It's very premature, in my view, to think about or be talking about pausing our rate hike. We have a ways to go. Our policy, we need ongoing rate hikes to get to that level of sufficiently restrictive.
Forget about pausing these interest rate hikes. They're going to keep going. The austerity moves, the tightening, the liquidating of the treasuries and things that the Fed's been holding on to must continue. He said that the labor market remains extremely tight. And then he said a few minutes after that, the labor market continues to be out of balance. And the point wasn't lost on Wall Street, as the chairman clearly signaled that he wants to see hiring slowed, maybe even layoffs happen, and to see somewhat of a decimation in the employment market. Friday, the Bureau of Labor came out and said that the amount of people that are requesting unemployment benefits is rising. It came up 0.2%, and that was enough to send all kinds of politicians out there to rail against Jerome Powell and say, hey, you know what, Jerome, you gotta stop this. You're gonna cause layoffs. Maxine Waters was one, Elizabeth Warren a few days before that. You gotta love how these politicians can somehow spend $6 trillion in the last 2.5 years in deficits and create actual more costs, because the interest to service all that debt they're creating is constantly making it more expensive for the taxpayer. But these financial geniuses are pissed because Jerome Powell is now having to correct all the free-flowing money that was pushed into the market through stimmy checks and all kinds of incentives that really flowed to everybody in the last 2.5 years, which is causing inflation. And they're spending more, which is causing more inflation. And you know what the biggest problem? Joy Reid came out recently and said, you know what the problem is? It's the fact that people know what the word inflation is. If they didn't know what the word inflation is, if we didn't use the term, they wouldn't be so upset about the fact that they're broke.
People I ever hear use the word inflation are journalists and economists. What they've done is they've taught people the word inflation, right? Yeah. Most people who would have never used that word ever in their lives are using it now because they've been taught it.
Yeah, that's not the problem. The problem is they don't have money to pay their bills. The problem is that wages have only been rising at around 4.75% in the last year, and the cost of everything has probably gone up 15-16%. Now, I know the CPI says it's 8%, but that's not reality when you look at how much housing has gone up and most of food goods and energy and everything else. It's much more expensive than that. But back to housing. Some of the things I want to cover today is that there's many markets throughout the West that are in dangerous spots. Now, you're seeing a lot of people push out clickbait lists on a daily basis. Yahoo Finance just put out one over the weekend. Google syndicated and pushed it even further, and it said these 15 markets are in serious trouble. And many of those 15 markets were not in trouble. They used different types of data, like how many properties had properties under contract that fell out, or pendings that canceled. That's not really going to crush a housing market. The other thing that they were using on a lot of those marketplaces that weren't really in trouble was they were saying that, you know what, sales are down in this particular market. Well, sales are down in that particular market because just maybe there's no homes for sale in that market. That market's actually dramatically low on supply, and that alone doesn't put a market in bad shape. In fact, it could be a very tight market, even though we know home affordability is terrible right now. Buyers are absolutely in shock. The interest rates are so high that they're actually really kind of pulled away. Week after week, the Mortgage Bankers Association continues to report that the amount of people applying for new mortgages is dropping. It's dropping dramatically. It's very, very low as it is now. So there's less competition, and in many markets, that's very, very bad, only if supply is rising. So one of the things you have to do if you're really trying to measure how dangerous a market might be from the standpoint of a crash is look at rising supply. And one of the things that I did, because I'm kind of tired of seeing all these bogus reports coming out saying, hey, you know what, this market's in danger, that market's in danger, is Realtor.com recently pulled a data dump. They gave us information of the direct supply for each of the major markets throughout the country. Now I pulled all that data, had someone drop it into a tablet so we can actually see market by market how high is the inventory right now across all the major markets in the country versus going back 5 years. So theoretically right now, if you take a market that might be, making bad news, like for instance, Knoxville, you take Knoxville, it's near Nashville. Nashville is even making news about how inventory is up 100% in that marketplace. Well, you got to understand that particularly in some of these markets throughout the country, inventory was on the floor. If it had a historic average, let's say of 8,000 homes, but it went down to 1,000 homes, and that 1,000 homes increased by 100% to 2,000 homes, 2,000 homes might still be 75% below what the last 3 or 4 years average active inventory was. So many of these markets that are reportedly in danger are not in danger, but they're making news about them being in danger because they can say things like, the inventory went up 100% in this particular area. We're all guilty of this, right? YouTubers, we make headlines into stories, and sometimes there's really not a story there, okay? What's really bad is I'm noticing that in some of these marketplaces that have dramatically low inventory, they will be near a marketplace that is in really bad shape, and the sellers in the marketplace with the still low declining inventory are reducing prices when they really don't need to do that. They're not in a marketplace that is in any danger. They need to give forethought to the initial price that they put on their home so they're not overpricing it and leaving it out there at some greedy price point that will never work in the first place because demand is lower. Most of the buyers that are in the market right now are sophisticated. So it's a different marketplace. You can't just camp out and put a crappy listing at a bad price like you could have done last summer and get away with it. But let's get into the West Coast markets. Many of these West Coast markets that are in very, very bad shape because historically right now, their inventory is up to where it was across its market highs in the past 5 years. In some cases, like Las Vegas, those marketplaces have higher active inventory now than they did at some of the softest spots over the past 5 years when the economy's shifted even in the past. Which, for instance, October of 2018 was a great mark to look at. In the West Coast markets, something happened in 2018 throughout those marketplaces where inventory got really, really high across a lot of different major markets. That same exact month was probably a response to climbing interest rates, and I didn't look at it, but for some reason, there was obviously something across the marketplace which was affecting the supply chains across those. And I won't go too deep into that, but there is a correlate between interest rates and pricing. Buyer demand and interest rates. And if interest rates go up, the prices tend, as a correlate, to come down. That's why the Fed has been buying so many treasuries. They've been affecting the mortgage-backed security market. When they do that, they artificially create low interest rates, which in turn keeps an inflated housing market, inflates prices beyond what buyers would ordinarily be willing to pay if those interest rates weren't held down so low. Because 60 to 70% of the buying public, they purchase homes based on payment, just like they do when they sucker you into buying a car. They don't talk about price, they talk about payment. So the reality is higher interest rates are a correlate to lower prices. That's why a lot of folks will sit there and say, hey, you know what? Interest rates alone could crash the housing market. That could be half true. The reality is that all marketplaces are a function of not just demand, but also supply. So supply comes into play. And if supply gets dramatically high, like we're gonna see in many of these West Coast markets I'm gonna bring up today, you are going to have a situation where you're gonna have serious price erosion. You're gonna have people that must sell, not the greedy sellers, but the must needy sellers. They will price their home to get out of the market, and there will be deals. And there will be price erosion. You're gonna see those markets soften. But I'll digress, let's get into the list. West Coast markets that are in trouble and what you need to do about it if you live near them. Once again, hit the like button if you appreciate the research. Subscribe to the channel because 70% of you are not subscribed. Check this out. Phoenix, Arizona has massively high inventory across a 5-year average. It is super high. All the metrics there are in bad shape. You have your day on market time is really high. The amount of homes, as I mentioned a couple moments ago, that are going through price reductions, extraordinarily high. Now I want to be specific about you, Arizona. Flagstaff, Prescott, Tucson, all of you, everybody else in that area doing okay from a standpoint of how much supply you have. And so there's not a need to panic when you sell. Price your home right, but don't sit there and get too fast on your price reductions. Any of these marketplaces, it takes longer to sell because buyers are just slower to the party. They're not in a rush, so you shouldn't be either. Don't get antsy and emotional when your market doesn't have much supply on it. Hopefully your professional can tell you. But Phoenix is in shocking trouble. Very, very high supply, particularly central areas and west side of Phoenix. Scottsdale in the northeast, the upper, luxury areas, still doing well. Not a ton of supply there, but you have a lot of those lower cost areas around Maricopa County, Avondale, Buckeye, all those areas that were really cheap, probably had a lot of California flight coming through. Those areas are seeing a lot of supply. Multiples 400% or 500% in recent months, okay? Next, Las Vegas. I mentioned it a moment ago. There, according to Realtor.com, average inventory right now around 11,000 active homes, much, much higher across the history. It is way high. Price reductions are way up there. Just like Las Vegas, Phoenix. What is the commonality between these markets? I'm about to move to Utah next. And by the way, I did look across all of the West Coast markets, really from Montana to Washington, all the way down to Utah, Arizona, and out to California. These marketplaces are heavily, when you looked at all the data for out-of-towners, people that were moving because Twitter and Facebook and Wall Street said, hey, you guys can all work from home now. All the marketplaces that made news where the remote people were going, these are the markets that are seeing dramatic increase in the amount of supply hitting the market and people trying to get out at the same time. So let's move on. I'll throw in Lake Havasu, which isn't nearly as bad as Phoenix or Las Vegas, but I know it's a border town in between. I think there's a lot of people that are buying lake homes, summer homes, vacation homes in that particular area. Also seeing a little bit of shock. Boise, Idaho. Boise, Idaho, I would tell you, is probably one of the most dangerous places in the US to own a home right now because I cannot get my head around how much inventory is on the market, how high the price reductions are. I jumped on Zillow to see what you could afford for a single family home around $300,000. Boise, no offense if you live there, is like a potato farm town. That's the industry there, that, and I think Albertsons is based there. I mean, it's like, what is going on there? You had a lot of, again, these people moving from the West Coast, buying affordable homes, ran the market on Boise. Boise's numbers looked like Vegas looked in 2008. I mean, off the charts, unbelievable. High everything. Down market's screaming high, amount of reductions of price going really high, and inventory is absolutely off the charts high. If you have plans to sell anytime soon in Boise, do it sooner than later. This would be my best advice. Moving on, Oregon. Oregon was a surprise to me. Not terribly high inventory. In Seattle too. Seattle's kind of getting there. Seattle's making a lot of news because obviously they've had their inventory climbing. They've had price reductions rising. We'll see. I want to leave Seattle in the close but not yet list, okay? Even though I know a lot of that central area of Washington's making a lot of news about all the price reductions, all the negative things that are happening there. But Seattle and Oregon I thought was going to have marketplaces. Bend, Oregon, Portland, or all those marketplaces doing seemingly okay. Not really high inventory there yet. So even if demand is a little off, be careful, price your home accordingly. You shouldn't be giving your home away in those particular markets as it stands yet. Montana, nothing to see there. Utah has some trouble, okay? Utah, again, just like Phoenix, just like Las Vegas, for the West Coast areas, this place is populous with tech relocators. And what's happening in the news right now with tech relocators? This weekend, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, which Elon Musk in the news is not as much the media darling as Mark Zuckerberg somehow seems to be, because Elon Musk is laying off 50% of his workers, and Twitter, and he's laying off the executive team and all this. Like Sunday night, the press started saying, oh, by the way, Mark Zuckerberg's doing the same thing. He's laying off thousands. You gotta understand, Twitter and Facebook have both, according to the data I can get my hands on, a huge degree of people who early on they were allowed to work remote in the country. Now you have Elon Musk who says, hey, if you work for Twitter, you come to the office. Now those layoffs take place, those houses, either they have to do something with those homes. Those people either have to figure out what they're gonna do. Obviously the market in tech is shedding jobs at the exact same time. So you lose your job, you live and you moved into Utah and you work remote for Twitter or for Facebook, who are both this week shedding thousands of jobs. What are you going to do? It isn't like you can call the next company, because they used to just cross over. If I lose my job at Twitter, I go knock on Facebook. So that is having a huge impact perceivably in these cities, because you're seeing the inventory in these highly remote driven workforces, people that were able to kind of move there and arbitrage away from the expensive towns that they were living in California or living in Washington or wherever they were working for tech. They're now seeing themselves shift. By the way, Comcast announced a bunch of layoffs this week. They have a huge workforce, 180,000 people between technology and cable. I think Ford is also laying off a huge percentage of the US workforce. Don't worry, Mexico, your jobs are safe with Ford. Utah's where I'm at. Looks like everything around Salt Lake City is a sinking ship right now. Worse than Salt Lake City, but not too far behind, Ogden and Provo, Utah. Ogden and Provo both in very, very bad shape. Active inventory through the roof, massive price reductions, day on market time. Salt Lake City, I was teetering on putting that one like Seattle on the close but not yet list, but it's there. I mean, they have redlining levels of supply right now. And so you are going to see danger there. Now, there's a lot of suburbs around those marketplaces. Be careful, be careful. You don't necessarily need to sell your house and give it away. However, you just need to look at the optics. You need to look at the market dynamic around your place. Some people live an hour, hour and a half away from these major spots, like Arizona. If you're in Arizona, all the news is bad, and you're in Scottsdale, like I said, you're not acting the same way that someone is in Buckeye on the opposite side of town. So even these, you're near these towns, understand this, if you are in a more rural, less desirable area, right? So just like in LA, when LA downtown gets super expensive, people would drive and move out of town. Those less desirable hour to work commuter outside suburbia areas, when the main place goes down and gets cheaper, those usually get hit even harder. Okay, but if you're in a totally separate city that's got its own nucleus of industry and everything, you're not even worrying about the main marketplace, right? You don't live in a suburb of Provo that goes in and out of Provo. You live an hour and a half away from Provo and you're commuting to the next town that has nothing to do with it. You need to look at your market separately. I am seeing a lot of people across the country that are nucleus areas of these markets that their inventory is super low, yet their price reduction looks like it's coming out of emotion. So you will give away millions, you're seeing across the board collectively sellers giving away millions of dollars in reductions that aren't necessarily, they're not needed. So we covered Utah, we covered every other area except for California. California, for all its bad news, a lot of their inventory is just not peaking yet, okay? So there's a lot of news, like San Diego's gone up 100% or whatever. LA's got the same thing. And a lot of people were in my comments, over the past couple videos saying, hey, you know what? LA is not that bad. It's not that, supply in LA is not that bad, okay? So it's getting close, but it's not there yet. Definitely ain't put it on the list. But there are two markets that I will say are there and are in dangerous territory, San Jose and San Francisco. Probably not a stranger to anybody, because these particular markets, they tend to become the lightning rod for softness. Whenever any market recession's coming for California, usually San Francisco's numbers will get worse first, and they are. For California, those particular are the dangerous spots. They're obviously very high-end marketplaces. They're going to be, limited on how many people are exposed to that type of real estate. So there you have it. I will say this, be careful of all the lists that are coming out. Over the next few days and weeks, I'm going to start finishing the research. I'm going to search the central regions of the US. I'm going to talk about Tennessee, I'm going to talk about Chicago, the middle markets, and I'm going to talk about the East Coast after that. Because a lot of these clickbait lists are junk. I'll speak to something, just a sneak peek for the East Coast coming, is that Yahoo Finance report that recently, and it caught ground, like it spread. A lot of people saw the article. There's like 3 Florida markets on that list, and Jacksonville, Tampa, I think, and Miami. None of those have anywhere close to ridiculously high inventory. Tampa is getting there, but still, there's been times where Tampa had a lot more inventory in the last 5 years. The supply chain, listen folks, demand is down. Demand is off. Buyers have left the building. But in order for there to be a jockeying of anxious sellers, cutting prices, setting new lows, supply has to get out of hand. It's a twofold economic platform, supply and demand. Runaway supply in the future of where we're going, because you got to understand, all these markets I talked about today are already in bad shape from a supply standpoint. What Jerome Powell is planning for the marketplace is going to cause more layoffs, it's going to cause more pain for consumers until they can get prices down. Jerome Powell cannot sleep at night if people with blue hair work at Starbucks and making $18 an hour as a barista. He doesn't need that. He doesn't want that. He has to have that come down so the cost of the coffee comes down. He knows it. Jerome Powell is not using any leading forward indicators for his decision making. He's using past indicators. He's saying, I'm only looking at the CPI. The CPI is still high, and the CPI folks, takes a long time to adjust. It's going to stay high. He's going to keep going positive on interest rates for a while yet, and he's going to take out jobs in the process. And unfortunately, this is how it works. If the economy is going to come down, the Chipotle guy can't continue to make $17 an hour to make burritos if we're going to have that burrito back for $6 or $7 like it was 3 years ago. At any rate, if you got a market you want me to bring up in the next video, put it in the comments below. Am I wrong? If I missed the mark, I want to hear from you in the comments as well. But if you appreciate the content, I'd love to hear that as well. As always, hit that like button. Appreciate you. We'll talk to you on the next one.